Walter Hayes had been fixing the same fence line since sunrise, the one his father built, and his grandfather marked with iron stakes back when the county was still dirt roads and handshake deals. His hands knew every splinter in the wood, every rust spot on the wire. 60 years of mornings just like this one, and he'd never grown tired of the work. The white SUV appeared first as a shimmer of heat on the horizon, then as a cloud of dust rolling up the unpaved road. Walter didn't stop working. Visitors were rare out here, and the ones who came unannounced were usually lost. The vehicles stopped hard behind him. No wave, no greeting, just a door slamming with the kind of force that announced its owner before she ever spoke. "Excuse me," a sharp voice barked across the morning stillness. Walter turned slowly, wire cutters still in hand. The woman standing there wore oversized sunglasses and pressed clothes that had never seen a day of honest labor. She looked at his land the way some people look at something they've already decided to take. "This land," she said, waving her manicured hand across the horizon, "is completely wasted on you." Walter squinted at her, letting the silence stretch. "You lost?" "No." She stepped closer, heels sinking into dirt that didn't want her there. "I'm here to fix a problem." She pulled out a folder thick with glossy printouts and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Her name was Karen Whitlock, though Walter wouldn't learn that until later. What he learned in that moment was simpler. She was trouble, dressed in linen. "You're old," she said flatly, as if stating a medical fact. "You don't use all this property. My community needs expansion land, and you're going to sell." Walter leaned on his fence post, feeling the familiar grain against his palm. "No," he said. Karen smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they believe the word no is just an opening negotiation. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume cutting through the clean morning air. "You'll cooperate, or I'll make this very uncomfortable for you." Walter didn't move, didn't blink. Men like him had faced drought, disease, and death on this land. A woman with a folder wasn't going to make him flinch. Karen paced in front of him like she was addressing a boardroom instead of standing in the middle of a working ranch. "I've already spoken to developers. Your land blocks progress. Walking trails, eco-housing, community access. You're an obstacle, Mr. Hayes, and obstacles get removed." "You're trespassing," Walter said quietly. "Oh, please. No one's enforcing anything out here anymore. People like you don't last forever. The future is coming whether you want it or not." That's when Walter straightened to his full height, and for the first time, Karen's smile flickered. "My wife is buried on that hill. 43 years we had together, and I promised her I'd keep this land until I joined her there. My cattle drink from that creek, same as my father's cattle did, and his father's before him, and my deed predates whatever nonsense you're holding in that folder by about 100 years. Karen's smile vanished entirely now. "I'm giving you one chance," she hissed. "Sell to me at a fair price, or I'll report you for illegal land use." "For what?" Walter blinked. "For being a danger," she said, her voice rising, "to yourself, to others, to the community that's trying to grow around your stubbornness." She turned, already pulling out her phone, already dialing before Walter could respond. "I'll let the police explain it to you," she said over her shoulder, and Walter watched as her thumb pressed the numbers that would bring the law to his doorstep. Karen didn't lower her voice for the call. She wanted him to hear every word. "Yes, I need to report an emergency," she said loudly, staring straight at Walter with triumph in her eyes. "There's an aggressive elderly man here refusing to vacate property he doesn't legally own. He's armed. I saw tools, weapons maybe, and he's very unstable. I fear for my safety." Walter stood frozen, not from fear, but from recognition. He'd seen this before, years ago, when a neighbor lost his land to similar tactics, the lies told to authorities, the pressure applied from every direction until a man simply gave up. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone speaker.
"Ma'am, are you in immediate danger?" Karen smirked at Walter as she answered, "Yes, he's threatening me, intimidating me. I don't know what he'll do." Walter slowly set his tools down on the fence post, keeping his movements deliberate, visible, unthreatening. He knew how this worked now. Every action would be scrutinized, every word twisted. She wasn't calling for help, she was calling for leverage, and somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. Deputy Lucas Morano arrived first, his cruiser kicking up dust as it rolled to a stop between Walter and Karen's SUV. He stepped out with the careful movements of a man trained to assess before acting, eyes scanning, hands relaxed at his sides, reading the scene before anyone spoke. Karen rushed toward him immediately, her voice pitched high with performed distress. "He's right there! He won't leave my property! I've been trying to reason with him, but he's completely irrational!" Lucas didn't look at Walter yet. His attention remained fixed on the woman in front of him, noting the pressed clothes, the expensive sunglasses, the folder clutched against your chest like a shield. "Ma'am, whose property is this?" Karen gestured wildly at the horizon. "It's disputed. That's what I've been trying to tell you." Lucas turned to Walter then, taking in the weathered face, the work clothes stained with honest labor, the quiet patience of a man who'd been standing on his own land since before this deputy was born. "Sir?" Walter reached into his back pocket, slowly, deliberately, making sure his movements were clear. He pulled out a folded document, soft with age and handling, and handed it to the deputy without a word. Lucas unfolded it carefully. The original deed, stamped and recorded by the county in 1952, transferred through proper succession twice since then, each transfer documented, each signature witnessed, clean as the morning air. Karen's face tightened. "That's outdated. The county will side with me. There are development considerations, zoning updates."
Lucas looked at her with the patient expression of someone who'd heard every excuse in the book. "Ma'am, this land belongs to Mr. Hayes, has for 70 years according to this document." Silence fell heavy across the yard. Even the wind seemed to pause. "Then arrest him," Karen demanded, her voice sharpening to a point. "For threatening behavior, for making me fear for my life. I have rights." A second vehicle appeared on the road before Lucas could respond. Sheriff Daniel Cross's familiar truck, recognizable to everyone in the county. He pulled up beside the cruiser and stepped out slowly, his eyes taking in the scene with the weariness of a man who'd seen too many disputes and solved most of them with common sense rather than handcuffs. He looked at Walter and nodded once. "Walter. Dan." Karen's eyes widened. "You know him?" "I know his father," Cross replied evenly. "Knew him, I should say. Good man. Taught me to fish when I was 12. He glanced at the fence line, at the land stretching toward the hills. "I know these boundaries too. Helped survey them once for a tax assessment." Karen exploded with indignation. "He's hoarding land that could benefit the entire community. He's hostile. He threatened me. This is exactly the kind of corrupt small-town protection that—" Cross held up a hand, and somehow that simple gesture stopped her mid-sentence. He turned to Lucas. "Did he threaten her?" Lucas shook his head. "Sir hasn't raised his voice once since I arrived, hasn't moved except to show me his deed." Cross faced Karen again, and something in his expression had hardened. "Ma'am, false emergency calls are a serious matter in this county. We don't have unlimited resources, and when someone calls 911 claiming immediate danger, we respond accordingly. Deputies get pulled from other calls. Real emergencies might wait." Karen scoffed, but her confidence was cracking now. "I was protecting myself. I felt threatened." Cross crossed his arms. "From what, exactly?" She opened her mouth, but for the first time, nothing came out. Cross stopped the playback.
Ma'am, you reported an armed threat to emergency services. That's not a misunderstanding. That's not feeling scared. That's a false report, and in this state, that's a crime. Karen's voice dropped, losing its sharp edge. I was mistaken. I thought I saw… No, Cross cut her off. You were manipulative. There's a difference, and judges know it.
He turned to Walter, and his voice softened slightly. Walter, you have every right to press charges for trespassing, possibly more, depending on what the county attorney says about that 911 call. Walter looked past Karen to his fence, to his land, to the hill where Margaret waited for him. He thought about all the mornings he'd spent here, all the seasons that had come and gone, all the people who tried to take what wasn't theirs and failed. Yes, he said finally, I'd like to press charges. Karen's face drained of color. Cross turned back to her, pulling handcuffs from his belt. Ma'am, turn around. Hands behind your back. The sound of steel clicking shut echoed across the yard as neighbors began gathering along the fence line. Ranch hands, nearby landowners, people who'd known Walter since he was a boy learning to ride. Whispers spread among them like wind through wheat. Karen struggled against Moreno's grip as he guided her toward the cruiser. This is outrageous. I demand to speak to someone in charge. You don't know who I am. Sheriff Cross's voice remained level. You're someone who lied to emergency services and trespassed on private property. Right now, that's all you are. Karen screamed over her shoulder at Walter as she was pushed into the back seat. This isn't over. I'll own this land one way or another. You can't stop progress. Walter watched her go without a word. He'd learned long ago that some people couldn't be reasoned with, only outlasted. A county vehicle pulled up as the cruiser departed, and Clara Benson stepped out, the records administrator Walter had known for 30 years. Her face was grim as she approached. Sheriff Cross called ahead, she said, opening a tablet thick with files. Walter, you're not the first rancher she's targeted. The screen filled with complaints as Clara scrolled through the digital files. Intimidation attempts dating back 3 years, false zoning claims submitted to the county office, aggressive buyout tactics documented by attorneys across 4 townships, 2 prior 911 calls flagged as suspicious, both involving elderly property owners who'd eventually given up their land. She's been trying to force transfers without lawful authority, Clara continued, her voice tight with professional anger. We've been building a case, but these things take time. Victims don't always come forward. Today's incident, your willingness to press charges, it accelerated everything. Walter studied the screen, recognizing some of the names. Good people, quiet people, the kind who worked their land and didn't ask for trouble. I just wanted her off my property, he said. Clara looked at him with something close to gratitude. You may have just stopped her from taking dozens of acres from families who couldn't fight back. She clicked one last file, and the screen filled with architectural renderings and survey maps. The label at the top read, Active Development Proposal, Whitlock Holdings. The proposal showed everything Karen had planned. Walking trails cutting through private pastures, luxury cabins built on land that had been ranched for generations, community ranch estates marketed to wealthy buyers who wanted the aesthetic of country living without any of its responsibilities. Walter recognized the boundaries immediately. These are all private ranches, he said. The Morrison place, the Hendricks spread. My land runs right through the middle of it. Clara nodded grimly. She planned to pressure owners individually, make them feel isolated, then claim voluntary sales to fast-track development approval. By the time anyone compared notes, she'd have enough momentum to push through. A man appeared in the doorway of the county office. Mark Ellison, a local developer Walter had known for years. Honest work, fair prices, the kind of builder who asked permission before crossing property lines. She tried it on me first, Mark said, stepping inside. 6 months ago, threatened zoning changes if I didn't partner with her. Claimed she had county support, commissioners in her pocket. When I refused, she said she'd find someone easier to work with. He looked at Walter with the recognition of a fellow survivor. "She thought age meant weakness," Walter said quietly. Mark shook his head. "She thought intimidation meant ownership, same mistake people like her always make." Karen's phone buzzed, and her expression darkened as she read the message. "Karen's attorney just filed an emergency complaint against you, Walter." The complaint accused Walter of harassment, of using his age to manipulate sympathy, of deliberately blocking community development through stubbornness and hostility. The irony of the accusations wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Sheriff Cross read the filing once and tossed it onto his desk with disgust. "She's desperate, throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks." Outside the courthouse the next morning, Karen, released on bond, stood surrounded by reporters, performing outrage for anyone with a camera. "I was attacked on that property," she claimed, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "I feared for my life. This is what happens when law enforcement protects their friends instead of the public." Walter emerged from the building with Sheriff Cross beside him. He didn't respond to her accusations, didn't even look in her direction. Some battles were won by refusing to fight them. Cross addressed the reporters directly, his voice calm but carrying. "The 911 call audio has been reviewed and contradicts Ms. Whitlock's claims completely. Charges for false reporting are proceeding through the county attorney's office." Karen's composure cracked. The performance fell away, leaving only fury underneath. "You'll regret humiliating me," she hissed at Walter as he passed. "I have resources you can't imagine, connections you'll never touch." Walter stopped and met her eyes. "No," he said simply, "you're the one who'll have regrets." A reporter's voice cut through the tension. "Miss Whitlock, how many other ranchers have you approached with similar tactics?" Karen's mouth opened, but no answer came. That night, the calls started coming into the sheriff's office. Ranchers who'd stayed silent for months, for years, finally finding the courage to speak. They arrived first as phone calls, then as walk-ins, then as formal written statements stacking up on Deputy Moreno's desk. The stories overlapped in ways that erased any doubt about the pattern. "She told me my water rights were invalid, said the county was going to revoke them unless I sold. She claimed my property taxes were in default, showed me documents that looked official but weren't. She said the police would come if I didn't cooperate, that they'd find reasons to make my life difficult." Moreno organized the statements into chronological order, watching the stack grow higher with each passing hour. "This is systematic," he said to Sheriff Cross. "She had a playbook." Cross nodded slowly. "And patterns like this turn misdemeanors into felonies." Walter sat alone on his porch that evening, listening to the wind move through the grass his family had tended for 3 generations. The fence lines stretched toward the horizon, solid and straight, exactly as his grandfather had laid it out decades ago. For the first time, he understood that this fight had never really been about his land alone. A black sedan with state plates pulled into the sheriff's station parking lot just as the sun touched the hills. The state investigator didn't waste time with pleasantries. She was a tall woman named Patricia Vance, with gray streaking her dark hair and eyes that had seen every kind of fraud the rural counties could produce. "Karen Whitlock is now under investigation for coercion, fraud, and systematic abuse of emergency services," she announced to the assembled officers. "This is no longer a local matter." Bank records were subpoenaed within the hour. Development filings were frozen across 3 counties. Property negotiations involving Whitlock Holdings were halted pending review. Karen's name, once spoken with fear in quiet kitchens across the region, became something else entirely. Toxic. Finished. Done. Walter watched from his fence line as Karen's white SUV sped past his property that evening. She didn't stop this time, didn't slow down, didn't even glance toward the land she'd been so certain she would own. He rested his hand on the fence post his grandfather had set with iron stakes and honest sweat.
"You don't take land from people," he murmured to the evening air. "You earn it, or you don't deserve it at all." Sheriff Cross called late that night, his voice carrying an edge Walter hadn't heard before. "She made another move, filed emergency paperwork claiming you've been harassing her, but that's not the worst part." Walter waited. "She submitted something to 3 of your neighbors, a document that looks like a county cease and desist order, tells them they need to vacate portions of their property for community access assessment." "She forged it," Walter said. "It wasn't a question. Wrong seal, wrong signature, wrong everything, but she handed it out like it was real, trying to create panic before anyone could verify." Walter's jaw tightened. He'd spent 70 years avoiding anger, letting patience carry him through drought and loss and grief, but something cold settled in his chest now. "She's not gonna stop," he said. "No," Cross agreed, "which is why forgery of a county order isn't civil anymore. That's a felony. That's prison time." Karen arrived at Walter's ranch the next afternoon with a survey crew in tow. 3 workers in bright vests, carrying measuring wheels and wooden stakes, following her across the fence line like they'd been promised this was legitimate work. Walter watched from his porch as they crossed his fence. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He picked up his phone and made a single call. Deputy Moreno arrived within minutes, body camera activated before he even stepped out of the cruiser. "Ma'am, you are trespassing on private property."
Karen thrust the forged document toward him. "I have county authorization. This is a legal survey ordered by the Planning Commission." Moreno examined the paper, then looked directly into his body camera. "This document is fraudulent. The seal is incorrect, the signatures don't match county records, and no such survey was ordered." Karen's confidence wavered for the first time since she'd arrived. She turned to the survey crew, voice rising. "Continue your work. This officer has no authority to—" "Ma'am," Moreno's voice hardened, "I'm ordering you to leave this property immediately." The surveyors looked at each other, then at Karen, then at the deputy's badge. One of them set down his equipment. "We showed us this order," he said quietly. "Told us it was real. Said the county was paying for the work." Sheriff Cross's truck appeared on the road, moving fast. He stepped out without hesitation, crossing the distance to Karen in long strides. "Turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back." Karen's voice rose to a shriek. "You can't do this! I'm a businesswoman! I have lawyers who will destroy this department!" Cross didn't flinch. "You're a repeat offender who just committed forgery and criminal trespass with witnesses present. Your lawyers are going to be very busy." The cuffs clicked shut, and neighbors emerged from their trucks along the fence line, phones raised, recording everything. Karen screamed as she was escorted toward the cruiser, her words dissolving into incoherence. Walter remained on his porch, watching without expression. "This land belongs to the community," Karen shouted over her shoulder. "You're all going to regret this." Walter's voice carried clear across the yard, calm as still water. "It belongs to those who respect it. You never did." An officer approached Cross as Karen was secured in the back seat. "State investigator just called," he said quietly. "They're upgrading the case." At the station, the charges multiplied on the booking sheet. False emergency reporting, coercion, forgery of government documents, criminal trespass, attempted property interference. Investigator Vance added one more, her pen scratching across the form with finality. Pattern-based intimidation of elderly landowners. That's a special designation, carries enhanced penalties. Karen's attorney arrived within the hour, his face pale beneath his courtroom composure. He'd reviewed the evidence on the drive over. He knew what was coming. "This is no longer negotiable," Vance told them both. "The state is pursuing full prosecution." Karen's whisper barely carried across the interview room.
"You can't let this happen. I have connections. I can make arrangements." No one answered her. Van slid a final document across the table, a subpoena for Whitlock Holdings' complete financial records, every transaction for the past 5 years. The numbers told the story Karen had never wanted told. Payments labeled in careful euphemisms that fooled no one. Land leverage consulting, pressure mitigation services, emergency response coordination. She hadn't just intimidated people out of their property, she'd built a business model around fear. Mark Ellison testified before the grand jury the following week. "She tried to bill me for what she called compliance consulting after I refused to sell, said I owed her for the time she had invested in making me understand my options."
More ranchers came forward with similar stories. Same playbook, same threats, same aftermath of confusion and shame that had kept them quiet until now. Walter listened to the testimony from the back of the courtroom, his hat resting on his knee. He'd spent his whole life believing that honest work and quiet dignity were enough to protect what mattered. Now he understood that sometimes you had to stand up and be counted, not for yourself, but for everyone who couldn't. Karen was denied bail at her arraignment. The judge's voice carried no sympathy as he read his decision. "Your repeated misuse of law enforcement resources and fraudulent conduct demonstrates a profound disregard for both public safety and the rule of law. You are a flight risk and a continuing threat to the community you claim to serve." Deputies led her from the courtroom in handcuffs. For one moment, her eyes met Walter's across the room. Not with anger anymore, not with defiance, with fear. Walter looked back at her steadily. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet certainty that justice, slow as it sometimes moved, had finally arrived. Sheriff Cross found him outside afterward, both men squinting against the afternoon sun. "She's done. The state's got enough to put her away for years." Walter nodded slowly. "Good," he replied. "So are her lies." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witnesses came from across 4 counties, telling stories that built upon each other until the pattern was undeniable. The recording of Karen coaching someone to call 911 with false reports played 3 times for the jury, her voice echoing through the courtroom like a confession. "Call them and say he threatened you. That gets them moving, makes the old ones nervous enough to deal." The defense had nothing to offer but character witnesses who crumbled under cross-examination. The verdict came back in less than 2 hours. Guilty on all major counts. Karen collapsed into her chair as the foreman read the decision. Her attorney placed a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off, staring at the table like she could will reality to change. The judge spoke without emotion. "You abused authority you never possessed. You weaponized public services against vulnerable citizens. You treated other people's lives and livelihoods as obstacles to your ambition." Sentencing was scheduled for the following month, but everyone in the courtroom already knew how this would end. Walter was asked to give a victim impact statement before the sentence was read. He walked to the front of the courtroom slowly, feeling every one of his 78 years in his bones. "I've worked that land since I was 12 years old. My father worked it before me, his father before him. My son works it now, teaching his own children the same lessons I learned, that the earth gives back what you put into it, that honest labor has dignity, that some things are worth protecting." He looked at Karen, who sat motionless at the defense table. "You tried to scare me into giving that up. You thought because I was old, I'd be easy. You thought because I was quiet, I was weak." His voice never rose, never wavered. "You were wrong." The courtroom was silent. Even the attorneys stopped shuffling their papers.
Karen didn't look up. The sentence was everything the prosecution had requested. Federal prison time, full restitution to every victim, permanent restraining orders protecting the ranchers she'd targeted, lifetime prohibition from any involvement in land development or real estate transactions.
Karen was led from the courtroom in chains, and for the first time since Walter had met her, she had nothing to say. Outside, reporters surrounded him, microphones thrust toward his weathered face. He gave them one sentence: "Land isn't taken from people, it's protected for them." Then he walked to his truck and drove home. Months later, the ranch stood exactly as it always had, fences straight, cattle grazing, the creek running clear toward the hills where Margaret rested beneath the oak tree she'd loved. A bronze plaque had been installed near the main gate, paid for by the county commission. Hayes Ranch, protected agricultural heritage land. May it remain unchanged for generations to come. Children from the nearby school visited sometimes now, learning about ranching history, about the families who'd built this region one fence post at a time. They ran through the fields and petted the horses and asked Walter questions he was always happy to answer. Sheriff Cross stopped by on a quiet evening, finding Walter on his porch, watching the sun go down. "You know," Cross said, settling into the chair beside him, "you stopped something bigger than yourself. Those other ranchers, they're safe now because you wouldn't back down." Walter nodded slowly, his eyes on the horizon. "I just stayed put. That's all any of us can do. Stay put and hold the line." The sky turned gold and pink above the hills, the same colors Walter had watched since childhood, the same beauty his grandfather had known and his grandchildren would inherit. The land remained. The lies were gone. And somewhere in a federal facility far from here, a woman who'd thought she could take whatever she wanted sat in a cell surrounded by walls she couldn't talk her way through. Walter finished his coffee, set the cup aside, and walked out to check his fence line one more time before dark. Some things were worth protecting. Some things always would be.